our invasion isn't just a national security issue, it's also a resource issue and an influence issue. And this is why we are posturing the way that we are posturing, because Venezuela doesn't have the ability to actually defend itself against our military might. The designation of these criminal organizations as a terrorist organization is nothing more than a ruse to justify aggression towards Venezuela to instigate either a revolution, an assassination, or Maduro fleeing, like Bashar al-Assad did. All right, okay, let's get into Venezuela real quick. Okay, guys, let's get into Venezuela, and then we'll go into our main story, which is Tucker Carlson. But let's go ahead and cover Venezuela because, guys, what's going on with Venezuela is nuts. I'll be honest with you guys. I'm actually very split in my view of this because on one end, I understand that these narco traffickers have been a problem for a very long time. But on the other side, I don't want a war, and we're dangerously close to flirting with one, right? And I don't think a war on drugs justifies a potential real military conflict. Does that make sense? So let's go ahead and kind of get into this from the beginning.
Drugs looks like.
I see boats coming in like loaded up the other day with all sorts of drugs, and we're going to take them out.
The U.S. military destroyed these boats in international
And I think they've killed somewhere between 30 to 40 different people in all of these strikes.
Waters off of Venezuela's shores. Trump is justifying the controversial attacks as targeting narco-terrorists. It's the biggest U.S. military deployment in the region of the 21st century.
Since the war on terrorism.
And it could also be targeting Venezuela's leader Nicolas Maduro's grip.
Well, let's be clear about this. Let's be absolutely crystal clear on this topic. This war on narco-terrorism, guys, is a regime change strategy. Maduro has always been a problem for the United States. And we're going to go into why in a little bit here. But I called this. If you guys remember, all the real niggas remember back in January. Remember when Trump was signing all those executive orders and he designated Tren Araguas terrorist organization? He named a lot of these Mexican cartels as terrorist organizations, etc. Remember that, guys? What did I tell you guys back then? I told you guys they're doing this so that they can use military and intelligence resources to combat this problem. Historically speaking, when it came to the war on drugs, it was a law enforcement only situation, which means gather evidence, bring it in court of law, indict them, charge them, pretty much ends there. DEA, FBI, HSI, we're leading the run on that one. But once Trump came in and designated these cartels as terrorist organizations, well, now the gloves are off. Because now you can use the full weight of the Department of Defense, aka now called the Department of War, as well as the intelligence community, like the CIA, like the NSA, right? Now you can use all of these tools that were historically used, that are still in place from the war on terror 20 years prior. Now you can use them against narco traffickers. And what does that mean? Targeted airstrikes, lethal kinetic explosions against these individuals, like Pete Hegseth has been showing on Twitter, that they're declassifying as it happens. We basically turned the Mohammeds into Miguels. And I told you guys this at the beginning of the year. Did I not predict this? I told you guys that they were going to leverage the might of the military and the intelligence community, the IC, to take on far more aggressive action against these drug trafficking organizations. Because once you label them the T word, yeah, it's pretty much a wrap.
Fatality.
Let's get back to it.
On power. So is this really a war on drugs from Venezuela, or is the U.S. up to something bigger in the Caribbean?
So is it a drug war or a power grab?
The Roosevelt Roads naval base in Puerto Rico was shut down in 2004. For the last 2 decades, it was abandoned and slowly being reclaimed by nature. But now, the U.S. military is back, and with their most advanced fighters, Reaper drones, and Osprey tilt-rotor aircraft. Puerto Rico is a largely self-governed territory of the U.S. The U.S. military buildup is not only on the island, it's taking place across the Caribbean, with warships, aircraft, and even a nuclear-powered submarine. And their sights are set on Venezuela.
It's a significant deployment. We haven't seen anything like this in a...
Yeah, we've been mobilizing quite a bit of military assets close to Venezuela to assert dominance.
generation.
Christopher Hernandez Roy is an expert on the Americas and on geopolitics at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, a U.S. think tank.
For a counter
Now, guys, I've never seen this video, but let me give you guys my take real quick before he gives his, just so you guys know where I kind of stand, and I can give some commentary on his. Basically, it's very simple, okay? There are two main powers, maybe three, okay? You have the Western Hemisphere that is run by us, the United States, where we exercise the most dominance and influence. Then you have the China-Russia corridor in the East, okay, where they exercise their dominance. One of the reasons why America's been able to stay a superpower for so long is because we are isolated. We have a strategically beautiful position where you have to traverse a lot of water and ocean to get to us, okay? We're smack dab in the middle of both the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean, where you have to cross these large bodies of water to actually attack us. This is why the United States is able to put military bases all over the world while keeping the homeland actually safe. This doesn't get talked about enough, how we have a huge geographical strategic advantage from a military standpoint, okay? It's very difficult for people to invade us and or attack us the way that we are situated. So we enjoy hegemony in this part of the world for a multitude of different reasons. Strong military, economic might, strategic positioning geographically, all these different things. Now, Venezuela's current dictator, Maduro, is pretty much liked and disliked by a lot of his constituents. And America views him as a dictator that does not run fair elections and a narco-trafficker. He's been indicted several times in New York and the Southern District of Florida, him and many of his people in his cabinet, higher-ups in his government, for drug trafficking, right? And as a matter of fact, there's a big bounty on his head. We covered this a couple of weeks ago, where he has something like a $50 million bounty on his head. Guys, to put things in perspective for you, this is more than Osama bin Laden had during the height of 9/11, okay? 50 million is a lot. I think Osama's peak was 30 million. So that should put into perspective for you guys how badly they want this guy out of power. Now you're probably asking, Myron, why? Is it oil? Is it their reserves? Is it their natural resources, etc.? Well, it's a combination of things. As you guys know, they have a huge supply of like crude oil, similar to what we have here in the United States. A lot of natural resources. But the other thing also that the United States doesn't like is that Maduro is aligned with and is supported by many of our enemies, to include China, Iran, and Russia. Okay? Ever since World War II with the Cold War era, the United States has been fighting a silent, right, and non-traditional warfare with Russia, okay, with the Cold War. Some people say it's over. Some people think it's still going on. I think it's still going on, maybe not at the same level where we had the communism paranoia of the post-World War II era. But I think it's safe to say that we shake hands with the Russians and the Chinese, but we have our fingers crossed behind our backs, right? We understand that they have nuclear weapons, we have nuclear weapons, so diplomacy is required. However, we don't trust each other. If I can boil it down into layman's terms for you guys, from a geopolitical perspective. We shake hands in public, but backstab each other when no one's looking. They catch our spies in Russia and China all the time. We catch their spies in the United States all the time. This is why the FBI has active counterintelligence groups that target Russian foreign intelligence and Chinese foreign intelligence. Okay? Now that we have that out the way, since Maduro is aligned with these other powers, this presents a problem for us. And the United States wants, given Venezuela's rich resources, they want a government there that is going to be pro-US. Think of Venezuela and Maduro right now as the equivalent of Fidel Castro, the former dictator of Cuba, who we've had a long-standing beef with, right? Now, there are other countries as well that we have problems with. Nicaragua come to mind and some others. Colombia now even, who used to be a great ally, but now we're kind of beefing with them a little bit because the current president of Colombia doesn't see eye to eye with our support of Israel. And Maduro also does not like Israel as well. Another fun fact for you guys. He's pro-Palestine. He does not recognize Israel as a sovereign state and is against Zionism, right? So he's against Zionism, as an ally of Iran, ally of China, ally of Russia. And they're in our part of the hemisphere. And they have resources. Well, my friends, this is the perfect storm for a coup. What is a coup? A coup, my friends, is where intelligence agencies, well, let's go back a little bit. For you guys to really understand this, I need to kind of explain this. After World War I and World War II, the concept of trench warfare and actually being on a battlefield and shooting and killing each other was something that the world didn't want to engage in again. Millions of people died during World War II. It was a very dark time in human history. So after World War II, what we saw was the explosion of intelligence agencies. And the goal of these intelligence agencies, to include the OSS, by the way, the OSS became the CIA. Real nigga stand up.
Welcome, punch!
Okay, the Office of Strategic Services, aka the O/Squad. But anyway, shameless plug. But we saw the rise of intelligence agencies. And what these intelligence agencies basically did was, instead of getting into traditional ground type warfare with large casualties, let's go ahead and take a more scaffold and refined approach. Let's overthrow governments. Let's use dissenters in that country against the leadership. Let's do false flags. Let's destabilize them economically. And this, my friends, was the beginning of the intelligence era, post-World War II. We went from dropping bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki to staging false flag attacks and assassinating leaders, utilizing in-country dissenters to do our dirty work for us. Intelligence agencies are notorious for paying rebel, militia, and terrorist groups to attack and or overthrow governments that we don't like. I'll give you an example. The most recent version of this is what happened with Syria. As you guys know, Ahmed al-Shara, aka El-Jolani, the guy that used to be a part of Al-Qaeda, he was able to overthrow the Syrian government in 3 weeks. Okay? He was able to get the Assad regime out of Syria after several decades of rule. How did he do it? How did a bunch of ragtag militia fighters out of the corners of Syria overthrow a leader that was backed by the Russians? Well, a bunch of different things happened. Now, obviously, I'm not going to go through every single thing, but I'm going to make it very nice and simple for you guys so you understand. The war that Israel had conducted with Lebanon in 2024, where they did the Patriot attack and they destroyed the leadership and the bombing and killing and assassination of Hassan Nasrallah and Fuad Shukr and a bunch of other individuals, led to an opening gap where Hezbollah was weakened and could not protect the Bashar al-Assad regime. On top of this, Russia was waging a war against Ukraine and did not have the resources to support Bashar al-Assad with air superiority like they've done in the past. Bashar al-Assad has been able to stay in power for all these decades because Russians gave him magnificent air superiority over these militia groups, and they were never able to actually come in and destabilize him. But with Russia having their hands full, as well as Hezbollah being dismantled, this opened up the door for Ahmed al-Shara to take over Syria within a couple of weeks. This was done through Israeli intervention, intelligence groups, etc. The Mossad deliberately, basically, what they did was, because the Patriot attack was done by Mossad, they decapitated the Hezbollah leadership, and that allowed the opening for the rebel group, backed by the Israelis in America, by the way, to take over Syria. This is just one example of how intelligence agencies work to destabilize governments. I can name a bunch of others, but that's the most recent one that we can use, so you guys have a modern example of how this shit works. But we can talk about the Maidan revolution in Ukraine, where the pro-Russia leader was basically overthrown and Zelensky was put in, who was a NATO puppet. Why? Because the United States wanted more influence in that part of the world. And this is precisely why Russia invaded Ukraine, to avoid that. Now let's bring it full circle with Venezuela. As you guys can see, when you are influenced by another foreign power close to the United States doesn't like that. Same thing with Russia. If you're influenced by NATO and Western powers and you're close to Russia, they don't like that. So for all intents and purposes, we're like Russia and Venezuela's like Ukraine, if I was to give you a functional equivalent to a degree. I would argue the Russians actually have far more justification to invade Ukraine than we do with the military posturing we're having now, but that's a discussion for another day. Because at least the Russians can articulate that Ukraine used to be a part of them, they're similar people, they have a similar language, etc. So I think the Russians have a stronger argument to invade Ukraine than we do. But our invasion isn't just a national security issue, it's also a resource issue and an influence issue. And this is why we are posturing the way that we are posturing. Because Venezuela doesn't have the ability to actually defend itself against our military might. So this is why we're able to destroy these ships with little to no consequence. This is why we're able to stage our military assets right in their waters or close to their waters. This is why we're able to project the potential of force with almost no consequence, because we run this side of the world. And they're going to continue to do this until one of two things happens. Until Maduro relinquishes leadership and leaves Venezuela, or he's killed. And I think one of those two are inevitable at this point. The designation of these criminal organizations as a terrorist organization is nothing more than a ruse to justify aggression towards Venezuela, to instigate either a revolution, an assassination, or Maduro fleeing, like Bashar al-Assad did. Now, let's go into a dream scenario. Maduro's already called for peace and doesn't want war with us for obvious reasons. But the United States is not going to stop. If I was Maduro at this point, I would be talking to the Iranians or the Russians, probably the Russians, about fleeing and just letting the United States have it. He's already wildly unliked by his constituents. Venezuela's a shithole of a country. You're going to die or get captured anyway. Because unlike Bashar al-Assad, you're also indicted for war crimes in the United States and narco-trafficking. So honestly, I think invasion and or destabilizing of him is imminent. We know that the CIA is working over there. We know that the NSA is collecting signals intelligence, and we're blowing up their boats. Kind of to test run what it'll be like. And then there was also talk of us potentially doing land invasions. So if you're Maduro, I think you got to be smart here and turn into Goku. The Russians almost always take in political asylum seekers, from American problems, so to speak. They did it with Snowden. They did it with Bashar al-Assad. I'm sure they would do it for Maduro as well. But I will absolutely tell you guys that Maduro's time is ticking, and that is why they want him out.